Test, test, test. If anyone is out there, there's a chat button, I think, at the top left of the window. It'll open up a little chat client on the right side. Feel free to type in a message. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Hello. Well, I can see it looks like there are viewers, but I cannot see any messages in the group chat. If anyone is able to open the group chat using the button on the top left of the interface and type in a message, that would be great. All right, well, if anybody can hear me, I'm going to give it like 60 more seconds to see if I can figure out a way to communicate. If not, I guess I'm just going to proceed. Or someone can just go reply to my Reddit thread, I guess, and let me know that this whole thing is not working at all. Does anyone know a way to allow communication? Oh, hey, people sent me messages. Okay, well, hang on. Let me try one more thing. Okay. Does anyone have a mic or a camera? This is going to be an absolute disaster to edit. Actually, no, I guess I'll just cut the beginning off. Well, the Reddit thing worked anyway. All right, well, in that case, if there are folks here paying attention, I'm going to get started and I'll figure out how to cut off the first, I guess, 20 minutes of this now later on. So, welcome. My name is Chris. I am just going to do my best to give sort of an intro to coin. I'm going to be using Cuba Libre for my examples and demonstration, but I'm not going to get into the sort of nitty-gritty of Cuba Libre specifically. There are a number of different coin games in the series. Each of them shares the same sort of basic infrastructure, the same basic mechanic of how turns work and how the cards work, and it's absolutely brilliant. But then each game has its own specific little details that are associated with whatever theme that game has adopted. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the basic framework without getting into Cuba Libre specific details and minutia, so that you can then get into a rule book for whichever one of these games you want to pick up in the future and at least have some context for what you're reading. If you haven't played a war game before, or a Twilight Struggle or a GMT game, these rule books can be intimidating when you jump into them, especially if you haven't played a game like this before. So the goal is give you an idea how coin works, and then you can jump in and not drown right away, and at least have an idea what the terms mean and what you're reading. So let's get started. These coin games are area control games, and that means you're going to be moving pieces around on a map and using those pieces to accomplish a goal, score victory points, and that is going to mean something more later on. Oh, Christ, okay. I think I'm still recording here. So area control is what it sounds like. You're going to be moving, like I just said, you're moving your units around to maintain control of an area, gain control of an area, and then using those units to do things, operations they're called. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the board and the map. So I'm going to highlight a section here, or sort of surround it with my cursor. What you have on this map is a picture of Cuba. The game takes place, this particular game takes place in the late 50s in Cuba. The map is divided into 7 province spaces. These are the ones that are just squiggly lines separating parts of the country. And then there are 3 additional large circles on the map: Havana in the top left, and then Camagüey and Santiago de Cuba toward the bottom right. So in total, you got 10 spaces on the board, all of which are different parts of Cuba. So what's important to note is just that the ones on the country itself are called provinces. The big circles are cities. The terminology matters for when I get into how some of the stuff works in the game. There are also these 3 little circles at various points on the map that just have numbers on them. Those are called economic centers. They're part of Cuba Libre. They're not something I'm going to get into. Suffice it to say that they have to do with resources more than anything else. You can put units there, but it's specific to Cuba Libre. So the next thing on the map is the score track. If you've played any number of modern board games or Euros, then this will look real familiar to you. I'm going to zoom in and show you the top of the score track, which wraps around the board. The score track is used for 2 things. One is there are markers on the score track to keep track of every player's victory points on an ongoing basis. So on this space down here, number 3, the green faction, I'll introduce the factions in a moment, but the green faction and the yellow faction both currently, based on the state of the board, have 3 points. The red faction has 7, the blue faction, the government, has 18. The track is just these little cylinders that I'm highlighting right now, the red that's on 10, the green that's on 14, and so on. Those are each respective factions' resources. Both those and the score markers are going to be moved around on this score track a lot. Like basically every turn something will happen that will probably change a score and or resources. So part of learning the game is learning to remember to move these things when you do something that's a score changing event. Anyway, so we've gone over the map and we've gone over the score track. The next thing to point out is the player boxes. There are 4 boxes on this map. There's a blue one, a green one, a red one, and a yellow one. Each of those belongs to one of the 4 factions in the game. To introduce them quickly, just because I'll use their names probably from time to time. In Cuba Libre, the blue is the government faction. Green is the syndicate. It's like it sounds. It's the mafia. It's the casino guys, the thugs in suits and sunglasses. 26 July, red. That's the red commies. It's Fidel Castro and his communists. And then yellow is a socialist student group that also was vying for power at the time. So these are the 4 factions, 4 players. Each player plays one of these 4 factions. The player boxes on the board are just for storing your own pieces. So obviously if you're playing on a tabletop, you will have actual wooden discs in your color and actual little octagonal guys like you see up in this box right here. I'll explain the pieces briefly because, again, this is a game where terminology matters, and once you learn the terminology, you're like halfway toward being able to play the game effectively. So 3 of the 4 factions only have 2 kinds of pieces. You'll notice down here the yellow and red each have these discs, and they have an octagon, a little, it looks like a cylinder, it's an octagon. And same thing for the green guys up here. Each faction has a different number of them, but at the end of the day, yellow, red, and green all have discs and these little octagons. The discs are bases of operations. If you have a base on the map, it'll allow you to do certain things. It'll allow you to bring more units into that space, certain things like that. The little octagons are called guerrillas, and those are the actual sort of boots on the ground. Those are your guys or your units or your groups of revolutionaries running around. And then the government is only slightly different. The blue government guy has bases still. These are still bases, the 2 little cylinders. But then the dark blue cubes are troops. They're like military regulars, the guys in uniform with the army, and then police, who are, that represents, well, it's what it sounds like. It's police. It's the guys who are in the cities primarily, keeping order, maintaining order in the countryside, things like that. So that's the pieces. And this is generally the same in every coin game. In every coin game, there are going to be 4 factions, and they are going to have 2 to 3 unit types per faction, a base and then a unit type, or a unit type representing people, or a base and then a couple different unit types representing people. The last thing on the map that I will point out now, although I'm not going to get to it until I've given a little bit more context, is right below Cuba, this big box that says sequence. What I was talking about. This is the sequence of play box. This is what makes coin, sort of. And it's absolutely brilliant. But again, it's not going to make a ton of sense if I don't give you a little bit more context first. So the next thing I'm going to do instead is I'm going to talk to you about the cards in the game, the anatomy of a card, I'll call it. So this is a card-driven game. For anybody that's played Twilight Struggle, you know what a card-driven game is. There are any number of other card-driven games. And all it means is that at any given point, there will be a card in play that's going to determine what happens. So since I expect some of you have played Twilight Struggle, I will analogize real briefly to that. In Twilight Struggle, you play a card and you have 2 options of what to do with that card. One option, and I'm generalizing. I know that there are differences if it's your card or your enemy's, but I'm general. Card. The card in Twilight, them have that happen. Or alternatively, you can do what's called operations. And that's where you take the point value of the card and you basically get to take those points and look at almost like a menu of options and choose something you want to do with those points. And then it's sort of your choice what you want, how you want to handle things. So this game is the same. Players will not have a hand of cards. We don't deal cards out to players. There's only ever one card that's in play at a time. What you're going to do is you're going to create a deck of cards, and the instructions for doing that in whichever game you're playing will be in the setup rules. But you're going to end up with one deck of cards. And all you do is you flip over the top card of that deck, and that is the active card at any given time. So the active card at any given time will determine who is playing and what they can do. So in coin, here's what the cards look like. I'm going to show you 2 things. I'm going to show you the top of the card, these 4 little symbols, and then I'm going to show you the text on the card. And this is just a sample card I pulled here. Actually, let me do this. Stand by. What have I done? There, we're going to start with, well, I've absolutely bungled this. Okay, so here's the card we're looking at. We're looking at the first card of the game, and it's called US Speaking Tour. The first thing I want you to note on this card is there are 4 symbols across the top. 1 symbol for each faction in the game. Now, every card is going to have all 4 symbols. You're never going to have one where it's yellow, 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 red, or all of the same symbol. You will always have the 4 symbols. They will always be in a different order. That determines the player order on that card. In other words, when this card is flipped up, this particular card, sample card we're looking at, yellow will be the first faction to potentially get to play on this card, followed by green, and then blue, and then red if it gets that far. So that's all I want you to know so far, is that the 4 symbols on the top of this card are going to be in a certain order that are going to determine the order. Then on the bottom half of the card, there's some text, which is basically 2 different possible events that might happen, 2 different things that might happen on the board. And they are separated in what's called the unshaded event and the shaded event. So on the card that I have highlighted right now, there is an unshaded event called Expatriates Invest, which has one thing that'll happen on the board. And then the shaded event below it is called an embarrassment, and it has a separate set of text for something else that could happen. So I'm going to get into the sequence of play in a sec, but it's basically you're going to be choosing between doing that event or something else. So that's the anatomy of a card, sort of. The next thing I'll do, and this is the final thing I'll do before I explain the actual sequence of play, and we're getting into the meat and potatoes now, is I'm going to show you the, these are called the faction cards. Again, to analogize back to Twilight Struggle, I told you if you choose not to take an event, you instead get points you get to spend, and I use the analogy of a menu where you're choosing from a list of things you can do with those points. Well, in Coin, instead, you have almost a literal menu, and I'm going to continue using that analogy for a second here. So I'm showing you one of the factions cards here. The yellow faction is called the Directorio. This is their faction card, which gives all the options for the things they can do if they choose not to take an event. There are two columns here. The one on the left, the header here says Insurgent Operations. Operations is the keyword. And then on the right, this column says Special Activities. So I want you to think of the left column, the operations column, as sort of the main course on that menu. You're choosing your main action that you're going to do for your turn from this list of operations on the left. And then think of the things on the right, these special activities they're called, as like dessert, kind of. They're like bonus actions. You're always going to do an operation whenever you're not taking an event. You are sometimes, but not always, going to use a special activity. And I'm going to explain. I just wanted to show that these operations and special activities are like the alternative to taking an event. So to quickly recap, here's what we've gone over. I explained the map. We have the province spaces and the city spaces, the ones on Cuba itself, and then the big circles. We have the score track, which monitors resources and victory points. We have the pieces for each player, which are in the faction boxes, and we have the sequence of play. And that, as it happens, is going to be my next topic. And this is how to play Coin, I guess. This is going to be the most important part. So take a look at this window and take it in. We've got a box on the left that says eligible factions, and it's got 4 pieces in it right now. These are little cylinders. Again, in the base game, tabletop game, they're little wood cylinders. Then it's got a set of 6 boxes next to it, and then on the other side, it's got another big box called ineligible factions. So at any given point, when a card is flipped over, you have those 4 circles I showed you, those 4 symbols at the top. In fact, I'm going to drag a card down here next to the sequence of play so we can follow along. So first card of the game, all players start out eligible. So all 4 players' pieces, action pawns, whatever you want to call them, are in the eligible factions box. That means any one of these players might potentially play on the current active card. However, on any given card, a maximum of only 2 people will get to play. And here's why. The next thing I want you to look at is zeros that go from left to right, from eligible factions sort of through those 6 boxes in the middle and over to ineligible. Here's how Coin works. When a card is active, like this US Speaking Tour card I've got right here, the first symbol on there, in this case Directorio, is the first person to have the opportunity to act on that card. Of these 6 boxes in the middle, the 3 on the left all have the words first faction at the top. The one on the bottom says first faction event. The one in the middle, first faction op or operation with special activity. And the one on the top says first faction op only, no special activity. The first person is therefore going to choose which of these three boxes they want to use for their turn. If the yellow player, first on this card, decides to go and take the event, one of the events on the card, that player would put his yellow pawn into the first faction event box and would then choose to have either, if you take a look at the card, an insurgent faction adds a die roll in resources, others add +2. That'll make more sense once you know how to play the game. Or the yellow would choose add the lesser of +8 or aid to government resources, then aid +8. So if you choose to take the event as the first faction, you will choose either the unshaded or the shaded box. Now here's what makes coin cool. The first faction, yellow, just went and chose event. The next faction who is potentially eligible on this card to do something is green. So green now only can take the box directly to the right, which in this case is op plus special activity. So because yellow chose to take the event, green now can only take op plus special or pass. And if you pass, you just move your guy down to the pass space of that eligible box, and then it would be the blue person's turn to make the same decision, and then finally red. So we're going to say, just for the sake of example, that green decides they're going to do an op and special activity. Green then pulls up its green syndicate faction card and would choose one of the operations on the left, and then would choose one of the special activities on the right. And that is what their turn would be. They would move whatever pieces around that they chose to. They would spend whatever resources they wanted. And then two players have acted on the current active card. So the card is done. The card gets moved to the discard pile. I'm using Vassal software, so I'm just going to right click and click discard. Both of those factions then basically have to sit out in purgatory through the next card. So I'm going to draw another card now and show you what happens next. And in doing so, I'm going to show you the other couple of options in the sequence of play box. So let's say that card was discarded, and we now picked this card called Sanchez Mosqueda. So now we've got a different situation than we did last time. When we started out, first card of the game, all four factions were eligible. Now, because yellow and green acted on the last card, they are ineligible. The only eligible factions on this card are blue and red. Blue is the first to be able to choose an option. So blue can again take the event if it wants. Or let's now take a look at the other two options. Blue, as the first faction, can also choose to do the operation with special activity. If they chose that, they would again go to their faction card here, choose one operation from the left, and then one special activity from the right. And in that case, they would put their little action pawn here, and that would mean red could then do the event or a limited operation, which I'll explain in a sec. So alternatively, let's take a look at this. Let's say we have a situation where you're playing as blue and you don't like either of these events, neither of the event. That means the bottom box here is out. You're not going to take the event as the first faction. But let's say one of these events is potentially really harmful to you or really beneficial to actions. If you choose to do a full operation with a special activity, then the red guy can take the event and you're going to get, screwed over in whatever way. So instead, your third option as blue in this case, in that situation, is you can take this top box. And it sort of ties your hands a little bit because as you see here, it says first faction, op only, operation only, no special activity. So again, you're going to pull up your faction card, but you only get to choose an operation from this left column on the faction card. You do not get to take a special. And those specials are, situationally, they can be pretty sexy. They're kind of cool. I told you they're like dessert. So in this case, blue maybe so badly wants to prevent red from taking that event that blue comes up here, sacrifices the special activity, does an operation. But then red's only option is to go to this right square and take what's called a limited operation. And what that means is red can only do an operation from this left column and can only do it in a single space. A little later, when I give examples of some of the operations and special activities, you'll see in a little more detail. But what I'll tell you for now is generally when you take an operation, you can do it in more than one space. You can rally units into more than one space on the same turn. You can march from one space to more than one other one. However, if you get stuck with a limited operation like red has in this situation, then you can only do it in one space. So that is big time tying your hands. So let's say it goes this way. Blue takes this operation. Red takes its limited operation. They, again, go to ineligible. Green and yellow go over to eligible. And it's sort of a rinse-repeat situation at that point. This card, which was just played on by two players, is discarded. A new card is flipped. Green and yellow are potentially eligible. You may get to a situation where, you know, green goes and yellow doesn't like its option, so it passes. And then after that card, after that hypothetical card, green would be ineligible, blue and red come back, yellow's still eligible. That is how the order can change up from card to card. So that's the sequence of play. It's this brilliant thing where it is super multi-layered decision making. At any given point, you have to look at the card that's present, meaning the active card. At any given point, you are actually also going to be able to see the next card, the on-deck card, basically. So you always get to see one card in advance. And you are then going to have to decide first, what benefits me the most right now, right? You're going to decide, hey, does this event really help me? Do I want to take the event? Does the event not really help me? Do I want to take the operation with special activity instead? But then second, you have to consider, well, what am I going to be letting the next guy do if I do that? So it's that same example I just gave where you would say, I don't want the event. I want an operation with special activity because it's a baller combo. You get to do all this cool stuff. But I don't want this other guy getting the event, so I guess I have to go operation only. And then the third thing you have to consider, since you can see the on-deck card, is what am I going to be giving up? So if I act on this card and my symbol, my faction is the first on the next card as well, well, if I act now, I'm going to be ineligible on the next one, right? So do I want to act now, or do I want to sacrifice this card, pass, and then be the first one to act on the next card? That kind of thing. Or do I want to, you know, the next card isn't that great, but I need to go on it anyway so that I block someone else from doing something even better. That's the sequence of play. That's how that works. It is absolutely just a brilliant system. This is what I love about Coin. So I'm going to pause for a second. I'm not actually going to pause, but I'm going to say if anybody has questions on stuff so far, since I haven't been able to figure out a way for messages to be exchanged within this broadcast, if anybody wants to like shoot a quick reply to my thread on Reddit or shoot me a quick message on Reddit, I will do my best to address those as I go. Here you go. So let me just catch my breath and have a drink for a second, and then I'm going to continue. And we're going to get into how to actually win the game and some examples of play. All right, so next, let me pull up my notes here. We have now explained the map, the score track, the player boxes. We know what a card looks like, the symbols along the top, and the events on the card, of which you would only choose one at any given time. And we most importantly understand the sequence of play, where the first eligible faction on a card gets to choose one of the column options on the left, and then the second player must take the column directly to the right. Let's start putting it all together now. Each faction will have its own victory condition in this game. They are all for the most part, a combination of a couple of things. And so for that, to explain that, I'm going to zoom back in on the map. Every one of these spaces, in addition to having a name on it, also has a number, and that is representative of the population of that area. So in this map, is 6. All of the provinces have a population of either 1 or 2. That's important to keep in mind because that is going to play a role in calculating points based on the area you control. So the next thing I want to explain is that every province and city also has a couple of boxes below the name. One of them is on the left, it's called the control box, and the other one is on the right, it's called the support box. The control box shows who has control of a space. You must have more of your own units in that space than anyone else's units total combined put together. You get the idea. So Oriente, let's take a look at this province here, which is Oriente, population 2. In this case, 26 July, the red faction controls that province. So right now, Oriente, sorry, I was sidetracked there for a second. Oriente is controlled by 26 July because 26 July has 2 pieces and the total number of other pieces in the space is 1. So Oriente has the majority of the pieces in the space, they control it. Similarly, Camagüey here, DR controls it because they have 5 guerrillas and 1 base, 6 total pieces, nobody else has any. In La Habana here, which is the little province below Havana itself, nobody has control. The green faction has 1 base. It's a casino, but that's Cuba Libre terminology. It's a base. And 26 July has 1 guerrilla. So it's 1-to-1. The unit type doesn't matter. It's literally just quantity of. So it is in a province like Oriente that we saw before, if 26 July controls it, then there's this little chit that my mouse is pointing at that says 26 July control. In Camagüey, Directorio controls it, there's this little chit that says DR control. So that's the left box, just a measure of quantity of pieces. If you have a majority of the pieces in the space, you have control. The box to the right is called support, or the support box, and it measures. They call it in Fire in the Lake especially, they refer to it as the hearts and minds of the people. So is the military in that space. Support and opposition in that support box is, does the general population in that province or city sort of support your goal? And in this game, it's communism versus socialism in the government. So that has nothing to do with the number of military units in the space. So I want, for control, that's military units. For support and opposition, I want you to totally forget about the number of units in the space. They will do days and events. Events and operations will affect the support and opposition boxes. But here's how these things sort of add up. Certain of the factions have a victory condition that depends on how much population, these little numerical boxes, they control on the map. So for example, the Directorio, the yellow guys, their victory points at any given point in the game is determined by adding the population that they control, and the number of bases they have on the map. So right now, take a look up at the score marker here. In Vassal, they're calculated automatically. It's very nice. Directorio has 3 points. They have 3 total points. And I said it's a combination of controlled population and bases. Well, let's take a look at the map. I'm going to zoom out a tad here. We take a look at the map, we can see Directorio controls Matanzas, which is a 1 population space. And that little marker here shows that they have control. So that's 1 point. DR also controls Camagüey down here, and this little marker shows that. You can also tell because they have 6 units to 0 other people's. That's another 1 point, so that puts us at 2 total so far. And what did I also say was included? It's population plus bases. Right now, Directorio only has a single base out on the board, so that's a 3rd point. That's 1 point plus the 2 we calculated before. That puts Directorio's current VPs at 3. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but once you get into the game and read the rules, you'll see that Directorio only needs 10 VPs to win this game. The green guys only need 8 and something else. The government, the blue guys, start with 18 points. They need 19 or higher to win, but it's really hard to maintain that high level of points. So that's how control works. You control a province or a city, and you get points for the number of population in that province. The other thing is support and opposition. So base total amount of support they have among the population. The other one, the opposite of that, is the 26th July. They earn victory points based on the amount of opposition that they have on the map. So here's how that's calculated. It also uses the population of any given space. But there are a couple of levels of support or opposition. It's a spectrum that goes from active opposition. I'm just going to change this little chit where my mouse cursor is. If the people really hate the government and are opposed to the government and love the commies, then they are actively opposed to the government. One level closer to neutral is passive opposition, and then you actually do get to neutral, where the people don't care either way. Then you get to the people who love the government a little bit. Sorry, they like the government. Passive support for the government. And then finally, the other end of the spectrum, active support. These are the people that go out and rally for the government, et cetera, et cetera. So this started out at passive support, or passive opposition rather. Here's how you calculate opposition points. You might have noticed when I was scrolling through those things that passive support or opposition have ⁻1 underneath them. And active support or opposition, I'll scroll over to an example over here. Active opposition, like in Sierra Maestra, is a ⁻2. What that means is you look at the population of that space, and if you have opposition there, then the population is multiplied by the amount of opposition in that specific space at that time. It's not cumulative. If you go to active from passive, you don't get another 2. It just goes from 1 to 2. So I'm going to take you through calculating 26th July's current score. 26th July currently has 7 points. Let's figure out how. Their score, as you can see on the scoring chit up here, is opposition plus bases. So let's figure out how much opposition there is on the map. First space I see is Matanzas, which is at passive opposition. That means the population of 1 is multiplied by 1. So we're at 1 opposition so far. Next, let's go over to Camagüey, which is the next place that has a passive opposition marker. Again, passive opposition is ⁻1. The population is 1 times 1 is 1. Added to the 1 we had before is 2 total so far. Now let's go to Oriente, which is another space that has passive opposition, but it's got 2 population. So now we've got 2 population times 1 for passive opposition is 2. So you're getting 2 points from opposition from Oriente because of the higher population. So far now we're at 4. We've got 2 from here, another one from Camagüey, and another one from Matanzas up on the top left. Now we've got, so we're at 4 so far. Let's take a look at one more place that has opposition. Sierra Maestra down here has active opposition. That means the population of that space is going to be multiplied by 2 for determining opposition. So we were at 4. Sierra Maestra has a 1 population, which is multiplied by 2 for active opposition. That's 2 more points, which puts us at 6. 6 points of opposition. And finally, if you take a look at the whole map, I told you, right, there's a single red base on the map, so that's going to be good for another point. So red's current score is 7, which is 6 points from opposition and a 7th point from a base. If red goes and puts out another base at some point, so I'm just going to drag one of these bases from the bottom right onto the map. Keep an eye on the opposition plus bases chit or marker on the score track. As soon as I drag one of these bases out, that chit's going to go from 7 to 8 because now we've still got the same 6 opposition and now we have 2 bases that are being added. Similarly, if I go to Oriente, which we said was at 2 population at passive opposition, that's good for 2 opposition points. If something happens that causes that to go to active opposition, either an event or 26 July using an ability called Terror, where they increase opposition, then the passive opposition goes to active opposition. You get the ×2. So now you're getting 2 additional points of opposition from that space that you didn't have before. And you see that point marker has now gone from 8 up to 10. So I hope everybody's following that so far. I'm going to check and see if there are any questions so far. There are not. So I hope that means I'm doing my job effectively for all 5 of you that are watching this. Thank you. So the very last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to give an example of how some of the operations and special activities work. And this is where I'm starting to get closer to Cuba Libre specific things, which is not the intent of this video, but I will show you how the directorial ones work because they are fairly common and representative of the ones you might see in the other coin games. So, and this will give you an idea sort of how to read the faction cards and understand the terminology. First things first, if you're doing operations and special activities, what you need to understand is that certain operations go hand in hand with certain special activities. So you can take a look first at the operations on the left, and I think that you ought to be able to read these on the broadcast screen. Each of these boxes on the left column for each of the 4 operations, the top right of these boxes has the name of a special activity that can go with it. So if you choose the rally operation, you can then choose to use the subvert special activity. If you choose march, you can also choose subvert and so on. And similarly, you can sort of reverse engineer that. If you take a look at any of the special activities on the right, there's a little header line called accompanying op. So for subvert, it says rally or march. That means you can only do subvert if you did, for your operation, a rally or a march. So let me just show you an example of how this works. And in doing so, from the way I have the board set up, it should also give you another quick example of how points can move around during the course of the game. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate Directorio Rally. The purpose of the rally operation is to add more units to the board. The location where you can do a rally is any space that is neutral or passive. Any province or city means basically any of those big spaces on the board, and anywhere that's neutral or passive. Well, you should remember neutral or passive refer to the level of support or opposition in a city. That's the box in any of these spaces. That's the box on the right. So, we talked about the passive opposition support in one space, passive opposition in one space, passive support in another. So Directorio is going to do a rally. The cost for a rally is 1 resource per space that you choose to rally in. So for my example, we're going to do a rally in 2 spaces. Now, what you do in the tabletop game to sort of keep track of where you're doing your stuff is you use these little pawns that you put out on the board, and it's real handy. So we're going to do a rally in Matanzas. I'm going to just put a pawn here to mark that that's a space we're choosing. And we're also going to do a rally in Camagüey down here to the bottom right. Those two pawns are there to show that we're doing it in two spaces. So I'm going to go ahead and pay 2 resources. Check out the score track. Directorio currently has 5 resources. I'm going to decrease that down to 3 to pay for this operation. Now to bring this faction card back up, we chose our locations. We chose a couple of passive cities. They're both passive opposition. We paid 1 resource per space. And now our options are as follows. The basic option, if you just choose a place where there's nothing special going on, you can place 1 guerrilla. Or you can replace 2 existing guerrillas with a base. So that's what we're going to do in Matanzas. We are going to replace, since we've already got a decent number of forces down here in Matanzas, we're going to replace 2 of them with a base. So I'm going to select 2 of these. And on the tabletop board, you would just pull them off the board back to your faction box. But here I'm going to select them. I'm going to right click and I'm going to click return to available forces. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a base out to the map. And as a reminder, take a look at the score sheet up here. We had 3 points before. Our score for Directorio is based on controlled population plus bases. So when I drop this base onto the map, it's going to bump up our score by 1 point for the new base. So that's our rally in Matanzas. Oh, my pawns disappeared. Now I'm going to do the rally in Camagüey. In Camagüey, I'm going to place units. So take a look back at this faction chart. You can place 1 guerrilla or place 2 with a base. Or if base, meaning if there is a base in that space, which there is, take a look at Camagüey down here. There's a base here already. Instead, one of your options is place guerrillas up to population plus bases. And that's for the space you're doing it in. So in this case, that means we can add up to 2 additional guerrillas, 1 for the population of the space and 1 for the base. So we're going to add 2 guerrillas into Camagüey. So that's an example of a rally. If you're taking your turn, you could do those couple of rallies. The next thing I'm going to demonstrate is March. And this will be another cool thing because it'll also show you how control works in a couple of instances. So for March, you choose destinations that you're going to march to. The purpose of it, obviously, your marching is to move guerrillas. Location, any spaces. You can march literally anywhere. So I'm going to put pawns into Las Villas and Oriente down here. Now take a look at March again on the right. Procedure is, I'm not going to go over the highlighted stuff or the italicized stuff because it's Cuba Libre specific, but generally speaking, move guerrillas into adjacent spaces. That's it. There's no limit on how many you can move. You're going to pay resources per destination. So again, I'm going to go up here. We chose 2 destinations. I'm going to pay 2 resources, bring us from 3 down to 1. And here's what we're going to do. We need control of spaces. That's part of our victory condition as Directorio. So I want to take control of these 2 juicy 2 population spaces to the right and left of Camagüey. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to march 2 guerrillas from Camagüey into Las Villas. And let's do this one at a time so you can see what happens here. Right now, take a look at Las Villas. The government controls it because it has more units than yellow. If I move 1 in, and you see the marker here that says government control. If I move 1 in, it then is 3 units to 3. It is uncontrolled. Nobody controls it. And then if I move a 4th unit in there, bam, Directorio takes control. And by the way, score also just went from 4 up to 6 because Directorio took control of a 2 population space. And then the next thing we're going to do is we are actually going to march 4 guerrillas into Oriente. So watch how this goes. We're going to do this one at a time again. Well, we'll do 3 and then we'll do 1. So I'm going to move, first I'm going to move 3 of the 4 gorillas in here to show you what happens. I am going to do this one at a time. So 26 July currently controls Oriente because they have 2 units there, and all other factions combined have 1. There's 1 green unit, that's it. If I move a single into Oriente, it's 2 red to 2 everyone else. If I move a second in, nothing happens. If I move a third in, no, nothing happens, because even though we have the most units compared to anybody else individually, yellow has 3 units, red has 2, green has 1, we still do not have more than everyone else combined. It is 3 yellow units against 3 everyone else's units. So now by moving a 4th yellow gorilla into that space, Directorio takes control. We get 2 more points for that, by the way. So score again jumped from 6 up to 8. Directorio is only 2 VPs shy of its victory condition of 10 at this point. And we now have control of the space. So that's another demonstration of control. So the other couple of operations are situationally sexy, I would say. They're not always, I use them less often than Rally and March, but I'll demonstrate them anyway. Attack works like this. You can choose any spaces where you have guerrillas and enemies. You pay 1 resource per space you selected. So we're getting low on resources here, but just pretend I paid 1 resource. We're going to do an attack in Oriente. So I'm going to move a pawn down there to represent the attack we're doing in Oriente. And the procedure for that is you activate all your guerrillas. Now, activating means flipping them upside down so that this little star is showing. That means that they are active or sort of like revealed. Otherwise, they're underground guerrillas. They're being covert. They're hidden. This means that they're just active and sort of limited because everybody knows where they are. But the reason everybody knows where they are is because they're attacking in this case. We just activated these 4 guerrillas, and now roll a die. And this is really the only dice you roll in this game. Roll a die, and then if the result is equal to or less than the number of guerrillas that you activated in the space, you can remove 2 enemy pieces. So we rolled, we activated 4 guerrillas. I'm going to roll a single die. It needs to be 4 or less. It's a 6, so the attack fails, nothing happens. Let's say I rolled a, this die doesn't like me. Holy crap. Let's say I rolled a 1. That is equal to or less than the 4 active guerrillas in the space. I could then choose 2 guerrillas to remove. So let's say I've got an axe to grind against 26 July. I can then take them off the map. Cool stuff. The last one of these that's important is terror. Terror is the primary way, I would say, for affecting support and opposition in any given space. So for the Directorio, if you're going to exercise a terror maneuver, or operation rather, since terminology is important, let's say we're going to do a terror operation in Las Villas. Put a white pawn there, pay 1 resource, which is the cost for that space. The location you can do it in, by the way, is any space with underground guerrillas. So point of note there, you would now not be able to terrorize in Oriente currently because all your guerrillas are active. But we're going to terrorize in Las Villas. Bring this faction card back over. We paid the 1 resource. We chose a space with underground guerrillas. And now activate 1 underground guerrilla in the selected space. I'm going to choose one of these 4 guys and activate it. If it's a province or a city, we're in a province, add a terror marker. I'm not going to explain what that is. That's a little detail that's in the rules that you guys can figure out if you choose to play this game. And shift support or opposition 1 level toward neutral. So this is a passive support space. We're going to move it 1 level toward neutral, which is the opposite direction. And when you're passive and you go toward neutral, it just takes you to neutral because that's the next step in the spectrum. So that's the 4 directorial operations. Let me take a quick look at the special activities. So I'll show you how subvert works if you were to choose that special activity. Subvert, I personally like to use black pawns for special activity spaces. You can do it in any directorio controlled province. So now that we took control of Las Villas, let's say we're going to do a subvert in Las Villas. So for your subvert, you can choose any one, by the way. The operations you can do in as many spaces as you can afford. These special activities are usually limited to 1 or 2. They'll say this one is province, or add the selected province's population value to resources and set the space to neutral. So this space is already at neutral, but if it was supported or opposed at any level, you would set it to neutral. And then since this has a population of 2, directorio gains 2 resources. So 0 to 2. The only other thing I'm going to explain is assassinate, because ambush is sort of self-explanatory, but I mean, at some point you guys are just going to have to pick up the rule book. So assassinate, like it says here, is intended to eliminate one enemy unit. It can accompany a terror operation. So if you did that terror in Las Villas, you could then do an assassination there. And the procedure is this. Remove any one enemy piece from the space. And that's it. I mean, it's plain and simple. I'm going to do it in Las Villas. I'm going to remove one blue cube because that's an enemy. Anybody that's not yellow is my enemy for this example. And that's the end of it. It also says take any cache marker. That's another Cuba Libre specific thing where if you decide that this is the game you're going to play, go ahead and play it. Or read up on that yourself. And cache markers, by the way, are pretty much unique to Cuba Libre and like the most weird and specialized little thing of any of the games. So that's basically it for the explanation. I will hang out for another couple of minutes, I guess, if anybody has questions they want to fire off on the post again. Obviously, I didn't cover everything. There's, again, plenty of game-specific stuff. In this game, there's this U.S. alliance chart that I didn't cover on the top left of the map, which determines how many resources the government has to pay for its operations at any given point during the game. Again, there's the cache markers I mentioned. There's other little things like, for example, this is worth mentioning because it's true in all the games. If you're doing what I call and what my friends call the double whammy, where you're doing an operation and special activity during your turn, you can do operations or you can do the special activity before your operation or after your operation or during your operation. You can only do the special activity once. You can't do some special activity and then come back and do more. But you can do it at any point during the turn. So you could do, for example, you could do like a rally and spend resources to put some units out on the board. And then you could pause your rally, do a subvert to regain some resources, and then you could go back and rally in more spaces. You can't repeat spaces, but you could do like half your spaces and then get some resources back and then rally some more. You could not subvert and then rally and then subvert again, or ambush or assassinate, whatever. So I hope that this has accomplished what I intended, which was to give context for the basic framework of Coin and to explain the sequence of play and to give an example of how one of the more basic and easy to play factions works. I guess anybody is welcome to posts or send a message to, I guess you could post a message to this page with the Hangouts link, or send a message to district_RE on Reddit. I mean, I'm always happy to talk coin and answer questions if anybody has them. But again, I haven't gotten any, so hopefully that means I did my job properly. And I guess I will see about having my video editing friend, who is far better at this stuff than I am. I'll see if I can have him chop off the first 15 minutes of garbage, and then I'll maybe get this posted to YouTube if all goes well. So hope everybody enjoyed it, and I hope everybody gets out there and plays. I am always happy to play by email on Vessel as well, and that's always a learn. I'll explain what you did and why it was good, or what you did wrong, and how it could have been done better. Okay, so good night, everybody. Thanks for coming. I was happy to do it, and may you all enjoy your coin adventures in the future. Peace out.